Commissioner Gordon, Bane has escaped.
Focus is not attention, it's obedience. It's a conscious decision to worship a problem with everything you've got until it bows. Most people spread their energy across a buffet of distractions, never realizing they are feeding 100 futures and starving the only one that matters. You say you want clarity, but how often do you submit to a single obsession without betraying it by noon? Focus is not a mental trick. It's a behavioral contract. Annual energy signs the dotted line every time you choose where to look, what to touch, what to build, and what to abandon. Energy follows focus like shadow follows light. It does not question, it does not critique, it does not differentiate between good and garbage. It flows where you point it. And if your focus is diluted by noise, fear, or approval addiction, then your energy becomes an engine with no wheel, reveling in place, deafening, violent, directionless. This is why the most dangerous people in any field are the ones who know what they're building. Not guessing, not dabbling. They've decided. And in that decision, every calorie, hour, conversation, and breath begins to obey. Most people don't run out of energy, they waste it, leaking it into dead-end conversations, ego battles, and simulated productivity. The mind wasn't designed to run 20 tabs at once. It was designed to execute, ruthlessly, sequentially. And every time you ask it to multitask meaningfully, it rewards you with fatigue disguised as burnout. You're not overworked. You're scattered. You haven't hit capacity. You've fractured your clarity so many times it can't hold a thought steady long enough to finish anything with consequence. Where your focus goes, energy follows, but so does identity. What you stare at long enough starts shaping what you believe about yourself. You scroll through images of success without realizing you're programming your self-position to believe it belongs to someone else. You study 1,000 strategies and apply none, not because you're lazy, but because your energy has no anchor, and without an anchor, your ship doesn't sail, it spins. Focus builds gravity. The longer you hold it, the heavier it gets. Eventually, it starts pulling in resources. Time expands, people show up, circumstances shift. The world rewards those who are clearer than others, not because they are better, but because the world is drowning in ambiguity. And when it sees someone who knows, it gets out of their way. Because even reality can't argue with conviction. You can't fake focus, you can fake competence, you can fake charisma, but focus reveals itself in the way your calendar is structured, in the way you guard your time, in how you speak when asked what you're building. Most people answer in fog, focused people answer in frames. Specific, measurable, non-negotiable. And that clarity doesn't come from vision boards, it comes from the daily decision to put all your power behind a single point of contact. If you want exponential growth, stop asking what you should add. Ask what you must ignore. The power of focus lies in the violence of elimination. When you stop touching everything, your hands finally become tools of precision, and that's when your energy stops scattering and starts compounding. One task, repeated with rising precision, is more powerful than 10 done with scattered excellence. The game doesn't reward the man who starts everything. It rewards the one who finishes something so well that it echoes. Focus doesn't get easier, distraction just gets more seductive. Every new opportunity will feel like progress, but progress that steals from your primary aim is a parasite. You want to be elite? Then let your energy flow in one direction long enough to build momentum, and when that momentum hits, guard it like a bloodline. You don't need balance, you need obsession, aimed. unapologetically, without the need to justify it to those who've already settled for less. This is the brutal truth. Where your focus goes, energy flows. But so does your future. You're not choosing how you feel. You're choosing who you become. Focus isn't a productivity hack. It's a spiritual contract. One where you say, "This is the mountain I will climb, even if it costs me the approval of those who live comfortably at the base." The brain does not shift gears instantly. That myth, the one where you bounce back from one task to another like a pinball with purpose, it's fiction. Switching between tasks leaves residue, neurologically, chemically. It's called attention residue, and it stains every thought that comes after. One distraction costs 15 to 30 minutes of deep focus. Every time, not because you're slow, but because your cognitive friction spikes. Your brain tries to carry pieces of the last problem into the next. And what's left is a half-present mind trying to do full-weight work. Focus fragmentation isn't harmless. It's sabotage that wears a disguise. You feel busy, engaged, alert. But what you don't realize is that you're playing chess while drunk, moving pieces but without clarity. You go from writing to emails, from strategy to scrolling, and each time you return, you're less yourself. You may recover your pace, but you lose precision. You trade momentum for microdopamine hits, and the invoice gets paid in fatigue, not the kind that sleep fixes, the kind that rots identity from within. You think multitasking makes you efficient. It makes you forgettable. Deep work, the kind that leaves a mark, doesn't come from grazing across 10 things. It comes from devouring one, completely, with no breath for distraction. That's when your mind stops reacting and starts architecting. But that state, flow, can't be summoned in fragments. It requires immersion. And immersion dies every time your brain gets yanked into a new tab, a new tone, a new task. Even your sense of time fractures. You lose the rhythm. You forget how long you've been at something. Your mental clock becomes unreliable. Why? Because focus generates its own time signature. When you stay locked in, hours stretch. When you constantly shift, they vanish. You end the day exhausted, but with nothing permanent to show for it. Not because you didn't work, but because you worked with a blade that kept snapping. You want mental sharpness? Then stop dulling the edge with context switches. Because every tab you leave open bleeds voltage. And every unfinished thought becomes a weight you carry into the next task. That's the real price of scattered focus. You're not just slower, you're less lethal. You're bringing a divided self into battles that require complete presence. The elite don't juggle, they sequence. Their lives look simple from the outside, not because they do less, but because they do with order. One thing, fully, then the next. When they write, they vanish. When they train, they don't look at their phones. When they plan, they isolate. Because they understand the brain wasn't built for constant context collapse, it was built for deep construction. And here's where discipline comes in, not as punishment, but as protection. You don't avoid distractions to be a monk. You avoid them to stay dangerous. Because when you lose focus, you lose force. You become reactive, passive, foggy. You still move, but your movements blur. And blurred movement doesn't compound. It just circulates, leaving you tired but unrewarded. Think about the implications. You spend a year half present, switching every 12 minutes. That's 1,000 hours of residue. Hours where your brilliance drowned beneath your own divided impulses. And while you lived in tabs, someone else focused long enough to build something eternal, not because they were smarter, but because they refused to splinter their soul across a dozen tasks per hour. This isn't just a performance issue, it's a self-respect issue. Every time you let yourself fragment, you're telling your mission you can wait. Every time you chase micro rewards, you're feeding the part of your mind that fears silence. But real power lives in silence, in deep work, in sustained attention that doesn't flinch when boredom knocks. Because boredom is just a threshold, and beyond it, mastery. Imagine waking up with a finite tank of clarity. Let's call it mental currency. You only get so much per day, not limitless, not renewable, just enough to solve the day's essential problems if managed with precision. But most people waste half that currency before noon. Why? Because every time you switch tasks, you spend more than you think. Every pivot from one cognitive context to another leaves residue, unfinished threads, mental bookmarks, subconscious tension. Residue follows you into your next task, into your next conversation, into your performance. The illusion is that you've moved on. The truth is that your mind hasn't. The brain takes 15 to 30 minutes to reset from a deep task. That's not speculation. That's the data. And yet, you check your phone during deep work. You flip from strategy to Slack, from focus to feed, from writing to browsing. And then you wonder why your best work feels like a shadow of what it could have been. You didn't run out of time, you ran out of depth. You tried to solve big problems with a fragmented weapon, and fragments don't pierce, they scatter. You're not just slowing down productivity when you switch, you're building mental static. The more residue you carry, the less signal you produce, and signal is where power lives. When you're clean, locked in, single target, you radiate coherence. You see deeper, move faster, communicate clearer. You don't lose your train of thought because there's only one train, and it's headed toward one result. That's how elite thinkers operate, not with more tools, but with fewer tabs. The myth of multitasking must die, because it's not a skill, it's a symptom of a fractured identity that hasn't chosen one enemy to kill, one mission to finish, one obsession to bleed for. The moment you divide attention, you dilute power. And when power dilutes, you become harmless. You still move, but your moves are easy to block, easy to predict, easy to forget. Think about it. Every time you shift your focus midstream, you're teaching your brain not to finish. You're normalizing mental abandonment. You're feeding the circuitry of distraction. You are programming a default setting of incompletion. That's why most people are exhausted, not because they work too much, but because they never work long enough on anything that matters. They live in the shallows, and shallow effort builds nothing worth remembering. You want depth? Then create boundaries your distractions can't cross. When you enter deep work, seal the door, not figuratively, literally. No notifications, no windows open that serve a lesser god. The battlefield must be pure, because your mind, if protected, becomes a weapon of truth. But if invaded by triviality, it becomes a mirror, reflecting chaos back into everything you do. There's a reason your best ideas come in the shower, or while walking alone, or late at night after the noise dies. It's not magic. It's mental residue dissipating. For the first time all day, your bandwidth isn't torn in 5 directions. You're finally alone with your full mental strength. No tabs, No toggling, just silence. And in that silence, you hear your own brilliance again. The cost of switching is exponential. One fragment leads to another. One tab breeds 5. One reply leads to a thread. And soon you're 40 minutes into someone else's agenda. Bleeding time you swore you'd use to build your legacy. That's not distraction. That's theft. You're not losing time, you're being robbed by your own compulsions. And like all theft, if you don't notice it early, it becomes permanent. Detachment is not enough. You must design systems that punish fragmentation. One task, one timer, one result, then reset, then move. Ritualize that flow until your brain rewires its addiction to immediacy. Teach your nervous system that delayed gratification is not suffering, it's sovereignty. Because the ability to stay with the thing until it bends, is what separates legends from noise. Mastery isn't born in intensity, it's born in duration. You think brilliance comes from talent, but brilliance is just the side effect of prolonged attention. The longer you stare at a single pattern, the more layers it reveals. First, you see the edges, then the symmetry, then the hidden mechanics beneath. Focus long enough and the complex becomes clear. Clear long enough and you start to predict what comes next. That's not guesswork. That's insight earned through cognitive endurance. But most people never get there. They touch a subject, then move on. They graze through disciplines like tourists, collecting surface-level knowledge and calling it growth. But real growth is vertical. It's not wide, it's deep. It's drilling into a single space until your perception rearranges, until what once looked random now reads like code, until your questions stop sounding like how and start sounding like what next? Because mastery doesn't end with answers. It begins with better questions. This is why focused individuals outpace the curious. Curiosity jumps, focus builds. It sees through repetition, it survives the boredom that filters out those who chase novelty. You don't become great by trying everything. You become great by refining the few things that hold your soul hostage. The ones that haunt you when you're still, that pull you back even when the world says move on. Because focus is a loyalty test, and mastery only reveals itself to the obsessed. Patterns don't show themselves in noise, they require silence, mental and environmental. Your brain must quiet its appetite for distraction long enough to absorb the rhythm of the thing. That's the catch. Patterns are shy. They hide from the distracted, but they kneel before the consistent. You give them time and they give you foresight. Suddenly, you're no longer reacting, you're predicting. You're not learning the rules, you're rewriting them. This is what separates masters from mimics. Mimics replicate outputs. Masters replicate insight. And insight is only possible when the brain has slowed down, tuned in, and stayed with one frequency long enough to hear the gaps others miss. You want to get dangerous in any field? Then get obsessed with the invisible. Learn to see what others scroll past. Because mastery is not a function of effort. It's the reward for those who focus long enough to uncover what lies beneath. Even in combat, the edge doesn't belong to the faster fighter. It belongs to the one who sees the pattern faster. Every punch thrown, every step taken, every breath, the elite spot timing shifts in microseconds. That kind of precision doesn't come from speed. It comes from slowness mastered over time. And it starts the moment you decide to give your full, undivided attention to the same angle over and over until it no longer surprises you. This is how artists evolve past technique and enter truth. It's how traders anticipate reversals before indicators trigger. It's how strategists dismantle entire systems with a single move. They've stared at the same patterns for so long that intuition isn't a feeling, it's a result. And while others are still thinking, they've already moved, not because they rushed, but because their mind has seen this movie before in 100 variations and knows the ending. And the craziest part? Patterns compound. The more you recognize, the faster you see them. The faster you see them, the more they reveal. It's exponential intelligence. But it only emerges for those who pass the test of monogamous focus. One domain, one battlefield, one obsession, until you stop trying to do everything. That's why switching kills progress. Every time you abandon your focus for novelty, you hit reset on pattern memory. You become a beginner again. And no matter how talented you are, the universe doesn't reward the dabblers. It rewards the ones who looked so long, so hard, so relentlessly, that reality itself started speaking to them in patterns. Your thoughts are not random. They are rehearsals, most of them unintentional, most of them undisciplined, but rehearsals nonetheless. The average human has between 6,000 and 10,000 thoughts per day, and 80% of them are repeats. Left unchecked, your mind becomes a skipping record, looping the same doubts, same projections, same self-defeating dialogue. That's not harmless. That's programming. Thought repetition wires belief. Belief engineers behavior. Behavior compounds into trajectory, and trajectory decides who wins. Now imagine if even 10% of that repetition was turned into deliberate mental loops, not affirmations, operational commands, systems of thought designed to reinforce execution, identity, clarity, focus. Just 10%. Not a transformation, a redirection. What happens? Momentum happens. And with momentum, self-trust returns. You stop wondering if you're capable. You start seeing your thoughts work for you, not against you. And suddenly, discipline becomes less of a struggle and more of an alignment. But most never attempt this recalibration. Why? Because they still believe their thoughts are reflections. They think a negative thought is evidence of truth. But your thoughts are suggestions. They are echoes of past programming, trauma, content, voices. They are not you. They are just what your brain defaults to when left unled. And what is defaulted to becomes destiny, unless interrupted. You want to rewire your life? Then stop trying to control all of your thoughts. Control where they loop. Every time a repetitive thought enters, it's a vote. And over time, votes become law. You've been electing fear, doubt, regret for years. What if you replaced 1 out of 10 with a command? One that builds a new mental reflex. That's not delusion. That's design. You're not trying to eliminate chaos, you're trying to tilt the ratio. If 80% of your thoughts are recycled, then your future is an echo. But if even a fraction of those are weaponized, you're not living in reaction anymore. You're in creation. And creation replaces control. Because you don't need to suppress anything. You just need to make better loops louder than the destructive ones. Repetition is your enemy when it's unfiltered. It becomes your greatest ally when it's trained. You want to change your life? Rehearse execution. Rehearse intensity. Rehearse recovery. Rehearse endurance. Until your thoughts start running drills even when you're idle. That's not obsession. That's optimization. And you won't need motivation to act anymore, because your identity will start working ahead of your awareness. Most of your failures didn't start with behavior, they started with loops. What if this fails? What if I look stupid? What if it doesn't work? Those aren't questions, they're scripts. And the more they run, the more you obey. But imagine a world where the loop said, we finish, we endure, we adapt, and they played on repeat until fear lost its voice, until action became your native language. You will never be able to silence every thought, but you can drown them in structure, schedule the work, stack the wins, and when a useless loop arrives, don't fight it. Replace it, not with positivity, with focus. Thought is energy, but intention is a funnel. It directs that energy into motion, into strategy, into volume. 10% redirection can overhaul a system, because your mind, when aimed, is not a mirror, it's a multiplier. Where your focus goes, energy flows, but where your thoughts loop, identity grows. If even a sliver of repetition becomes intentional, you don't just change the way you think, you rewrite the future that thinking builds.